Alright guys, so in today's video, we have here something really interesting because we actually have the Holy Trinity, if you want to call that, from BBK. So we have the Realme GT7 Pro, we also have the OPPO Find X8 Pro, and we also have the Vivo X200 Pro. Now in today's video, it's not going to be a super detailed comparison. In fact, I won't even consider this video a comparison. This is sort of like a podcast if you want. I'm not going to put in beautiful B-rolls of these devices. I'm just here to share with you like, which device should you really get and which one, actually suits you best. Alright, so we got to start off with the price. Naturally, the Realme device is the most affordable one and it's by a far margin compared to these bigger boys, which is actually about 1,000 ringgit more than a Realme. Alright, so what are you actually getting here? Now let's start off with the design of all three. So if you just take a look at the design here, of course, they each have their own unique look. The Realme itself is, personally, I think it's quite a standard design. It's not super slim. It looks okay if you ask me. Personally, I'm a fan of this orange colorway, but there's also the silver or gray if you want to go for a more subtle kind of look. Now moving on to the bigger boys, the OPPO and the Vivo actually looks very similar. You notice one difference whenever you just pick these devices up, and that is the OPPO is slightly more slimmer than the Vivo. And that's because it's just thinner in terms of its profile, and the camera lens, because it has a slightly smaller sensor compared to the Vivo, so it's a bit thinner at the back as well. So just in terms of this hand feeling here, I think the OPPO actually has the best feeling in hand, followed by the Realme because it's not that thick, and then we go to the Vivo because it's just a bit head heavy on the top here, and it also is a little bit thicker. Another thing about the OPPO device is that it also comes with that, slider at the side here. Is the only one that does that, and it's the only one that also comes with this quick side button. Now moving on, let's talk a bit about the displays. Alright, the displays on all three, guess what? They're all really identical. So the sizes are all the same. They're each 6.78 inches, LTPO AMOLED, 120 Hz. Very similar across the board, guys. Not surprising actually. The only main difference I would say here is actually the one on the Realme. This guy here, although it's the cheapest out of the three, it actually gets the brightest, the highest brightness levels. But that's not to say that these two devices are dim in terms of their brightness. They also get up to 4500. It's just that the Realme does 6000 nits, which is pretty insane. Alright, so that's just in terms of the display. They all look great, by the way. Oh, one more thing I should highlight here is that they all also practice the same concept. That means that their curves on the sides here is just ever so tiny, so it won't really affect you in terms of your usage, especially image distortion when you look from the side. And if you are a gamer, like I said, it's just a minimal, very minimal kind of a curve at the sides here. Alright, let's move on and talk about the performance. Now, a lot of y'all already know that this is where it goes a bit different. So the Realme here is powered by the Snapdragon 8 Elite, and these guys here are powered by Dimensity 9400 chipset. Now, obviously, the three of them are all using their flagship chipsets. So personally, I don't think you should care too much about benchmark scores, which one scores higher than the other. Effectively, they're all great to use. If you ever have the chance to use either one of them, I think that's really a great thing and you would enjoy fantastic performance. Alright, so now I'm not going to talk too much about the performance. Let's move on and talk about the cameras because this is where things get a bit interesting. Now we're going to start off with the Realme. Now being the lowest price of the trio, it comes with the smallest 50 megapixel sensor. It does come with a 50 megapixel telephoto lens, which is similar to the one on the OPPO, but then they got to cut down on the ultra wide as well with only an 8 megapixel here. So you can definitely see where Realme is scaling down in terms of their budgeting and all that, how they're keeping the cost low, and that's primarily in the cameras. Now that's not to say that the 50MP is a bad thing. The funny thing is that I did notice that the main camera's performance is actually a bit similar to the OPPO. Funny, huh? Because they actually have the same amount of filters in it as well. So very similar kind of performance, but the one on the Realme is a little bit more saturated than the one on the OPPO. Now, back to these big boys here. What do we have that's different here? Alright, so on the Vivo, we have a triple camera setup, whereas on the OPPO, we have a quad camera setup. I think this is where the main difference is. So I've got some numbers in front of me here. Now, they both have a 50 megapixel main sensor, but obviously, like I said just now, the one on the Vivo is slightly larger than the one on the OPPO. And that's why it's also a bit thicker. Now moving on, this device here, the Vivo, has a 200 megapixel 3.7 times telephoto lens. So it's only one telephoto that you get on the Vivo, whereas on the OPPO you actually have a 3 times and a 6 times that gives you more flexibility. They're both 50 megapixels. Honestly speaking, I don't think there's a huge difference between 50 and 200 because a lot of the zoom images are actually touched up by AI and that actually helps you to get a better picture. So I think it's a bit more flexible on the OPPO device. Now in terms of the ultra wide, they're both 50 megapixel and they are very similar in size. So just in terms of the camera experience, now, if you are just a normal kind of photographer, you're not like, serious photography, I must have the greatest picture and all that. Personally, I think the Realme actually does a decent job. And if you think about how often you take ultra-wide shots, do you take a lot of ultra-wide shots? If you don't, it's not that important, then this device is more than enough. Now, if you move on to the Vivo, I think this device here really excels in terms of portraits. So far, I've been seeing like the Vivo doing the best in terms of portraits. For instance, the face, everything looks more natural. And I like the fact that it actually comes with 3 different colors options. So you have your natural, you have a textured, and you have the Zeiss. That means you can actually choose the level of saturations on your camera to actually get your photo. Now, you don't really have that on the OPPO. It's only fixed. So you actually have pictures that look a little bit more natural than the Realme, but a bit more saturated than the Vivo. Now, having said that, it has that really strong telephoto lens of 3 and 6 times, and this actually gives you more flexibility when you're taking a portrait of a person, or if you're just zooming into objects that are very far away. So just in terms of photography, I would say that they're both focused differently. It really depends on your own kind of use case. Again, if you're just a normal photographer, this is good enough, but depending on your needs in terms of the zoom, you have to choose either one of these. Now let's move on and talk about the final point here, and that's actually about the batteries. Now, like I said in the beginning, it's very interesting that the Realme here, maybe it's being focused as a gaming device, so that's why it has the largest battery. Besides that, it also comes with the fastest charging on board, so this guy here charges up the fastest. If you're just looking for outright battery life, the Realme is the one to go for. Now, if you move on to these guys here, the OPPO actually has a slightly longer battery life compared to the Vivo device, but if you want the largest, this is where you get it on the Realme. Alright, so at the end of the day, which device should you go for? Well, let's start off with the basics. If your budget is really limited, you're looking to get the best entry-level flagship phone, if that means anything to you, well, the Realme GT7 Pro here is a great candidate for you to go for, simply because it comes with a ton of strong features, not just that chipset, you also get a decent camera, and you get a great display at the front here, the brightest in fact, and the largest battery with the fastest charging. Now, I know a lot of people are complaining about the price, saying that it's so much more expensive than China. So, I mean, if you really want to compare it with every single country, you won't be happy at all. But if you just look at what's available today for 3,000 plus ringgit, this is actually the strongest option. Alright, now if you just move on to more serious stuff here, if you go on to the serious photography game, so this is where it gets a bit interesting. Should you go for the Vivo or the OPPO? Well, again, this really depends on what you're taking. I would say that for the Vivo, if you are someone who travels a lot, maybe you want to take a lot of photos of people, your family, your friends, whatever, this guy here actually does a great job. I think what separates the Vivo and OPPO is also the OS itself. It's really down to your personal preference. Now, finally, moving on to the OPPO. If you're someone who really appreciates a slightly slimmer form factor, one that actually feels great in hand, it actually feels really comfortable. Like out of all 3, it feels fantastic in hand. You're okay with color OS, you're happy with the cameras, the display is great. I would say that this is actually a great all-rounder in that sense. So yeah, let me know which one you would pick. Again, like I said, no one is the true winner here. Having either of these devices already puts you a winner, but let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. This video is not sponsored by anybody. Yeah, that's it for today's video. Very long. I hope you guys have a great weekend, and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye bye.